Hi everybody, welcome back to Coding Club. Today we are trying a new format, so give me some feedback. Let me know how this works for you. Today we are going to be talking about variables and types of data. So our learning objectives for today are to identify between data types, to create a global variable to be used within the game, and then to demonstrate an effective testing table. The third one you should be pretty familiar with by now. So variables, this slide says it is a temporary storage location for one piece of data. I think of them like file folders on your laptop. So you look into a file for a particular document and you can move things in and out of that file folder. So any variable creates its own file folder and you can check data in that folder or you can change the data within that folder. So there are four different types of variables we are going to be talking about today. The first variable is a number integer. Those are whole numbers or counting numbers. If you need a decimal point, this is not the variable for you. The second variable is called a string. Computers can't understand human language, so therefore whenever you need to display human language or use it, you have to put it in quotation marks. So if you want the variable value to be bananas, you have to put quotation marks around bananas. The third type of variable is a float. Those are numbers with decimal points in them. And then finally, a true or false is called a Boolean. So if you need to just check if something is true or something is false or equal to, then you would have a Boolean variable. So you are going to identify which type of data are shown. I have 6 examples here, and you need to tell me whether or not they are integers, strings, floating, or Boolean. Okay, so the first example in the upper left-hand corner has a decimal point in it, so therefore it is a float variable. The second square has false in it, so that's Boolean, and because there's no quotation is not the string false, it is a Boolean. And then the third has quotation marks around it, so that's how you know it is a string variable. Next, in the lower left-hand corner, we have an integer. Note there are no decimal points. We have another Boolean for true, and in the final square, there is quotation marks around the word integer, so we know that is a string variable. So now we are going to go ahead and get started with our game. I hope that you weren't like me and that you've been saving your game after each session. If not, you'll have to do what I did, which is real quickly get back up to where we were with the last lesson. So I am already logged in, as you can see. I'm going to go to menu, then I'm going to go to project and open recent, and that's my Chasing Cherries project. Okay, so what you should have from last time, and if not, pause this video and take a second to go ahead and catch up, is you should have a background with a car and several cones. However, cones doesn't really matter. If you press play, or preview rather, you should have a car that when it drives into a cone, the cone disappears. And if the car drives, you notice that the camera follows the car. And finally, when the car reaches the edge of the screen, it stops. You're not allowed to drive off the screen. So again, if you are not there, then please pause the video and go back to one of the previous lessons. So today we are going to add a variable. So every time we get a cone, the cone disappears, but nothing really happens in a game. If this were a pretty typical game, we would add a score and you would increase the score by hitting the cones. So that's what we're going to do today. So every time we hit a cone, we want to have a score that increases. Notice we are going to spark an action by doing something else. So in that case, we need to add an event to our event sheet. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to add a global variable. A global variable means that we can use it in all areas of our game. So I'm going to right-click this white space, and then I'm going to click Add a Global Variable. So the name of this variable is going to be score. So if you look, I have different types here. Boolean, which is true or false, number, or string, which is just using human language. But we need a number because we are going to be adding to that number. We want the score to start at 0, so we're going to leave it here. I'm going to go ahead and add a description and how many times the car hits a cone. All right, and then I'm going to click OK. So you notice that we have this new score to work with. So what we want to happen is every time we hit a cone with a car, we want the score to increase. So we already have an event um, where a cone collides with the car. So we're just going to add another action to the same event. So already we have the cone disappears. We destroy it. So we're going to add an action here. This is going to be called a system action. So we're going to click next. Then every time the cone has a collision with a car, we're going to add to the variable score. If you click the down arrow, you'll notice that we don't have any other variables, but if we had multiple variables, we could choose. So now we can figure out how much a cone is worth. We could set it at 100 points, but I'm just going to leave it at 1 right now. So now, every time the cone collides with the car, the cone disappears, and we add 1 to score. However, if you press preview and we hit the cones, now the value for score is actually changing, but we're not displaying the score, so we're not getting that output from the computer. So we're going to go ahead and fix that now. So we are going to do that by going back to our layout, and we're going to add layers. You've heard me before talk about a layout like it's a sheet of paper. What we are going to do is we are going to add another sheet of paper on top of that with our value score. And the reason we're going to put it on a different layer is so that the car or anything else that's happening here is not going to interact with the value score, which we are going to put in the upper left-hand corner. It's just a layer on top so the car can't run into the text. It can't interact with the text. The text is on a completely different plane. So what we are going to do is we are going to locate our layers, which is here. Right now we just have one layer, layer 0, and all of our items are on layer 0. But we are going to add another layer on top, and we're going to call that layer score, just so we know that's just where our score lives. So we have score highlighted. So over here, we have layer properties. We are going to go to something called a parallax. Parallax is when you look at something and from a different perspective, it looks different. For instance, if you're looking out the window of a car while it's driving on the highway, you see that the electrical poles are probably going by pretty fast, or the light poles on the expressway. But if you look in the distance, trees are appear to be traveling slower. So we can change the perspective by using this parallax value. What we are going to do is we are going to fix it so that no matter where the car is, and you notice the camera scrolls with the car, that the score is going to always appear to be in that upper left-hand corner. So that's what the parallax is. When we start building other games where you have backgrounds and different layers, you'll see how that can be even more useful. So we have the parallax here. So now we have the layer score all set up. We have the parallax set, meaning that its perspective is always going to be set to this upper left-hand corner. So now we just need to add something to that layer. If you recall from before, we're just going to double-click the background, and it's going to give us some options. Now we are going to add some text. And we're just going to click, roughly where we want it. We can always move it around, but I'm just going to start with it here. So we have the text highlighted. So if you notice, the properties over here are for text. What we are going to do is scroll down to like the font. We want this score to pop, so I'm going to change this color to yellow. And then I'm going to, so this is the range of colors that we're dealing with. So I'm going to get in the yellow range. I'm going to click this eyedropper, and then I'm going to pick the yellow that I want. So I want that yellow. And if you notice, the color of the text changed here. And the color of the text changed here. Also, this text is pretty small. So, oops, I'm going to highlight the text again and go back to text properties. And then I'm going to, you can change the font. I'm going to change the size to 24. And I'm going to make this bold so it pops a little more. So if you notice, text is kind of cut off a little bit. I made the text big enough that it cut off the text. So I'm just going to increase the size of that box. So now we have text here, but it's not connected to the score at all. It's just some random letters that are in the upper left-hand corner. So I'm going to go back to my event sheet. So we are going to add an action. You'll see some blank actions here because I was having some trouble before. So just ignore that. You're going to click add event. I'm just going to double click here because I already have an event. So this is going to be a system event. We're going to click next. We want this to happen every tick. Every tick is pretty much every time the program is checking to see what its instructions are. This happens so fast that to a human, it might as well be continuous. So we want this event to happen every single time the program checks its instructions. So I'm going to select every tick and then click next. Now I'm going to add an action. This is going to be a text action. What we're going to do is at every tick, we're going to set the text. Now the question is, what are we going to set the text to? We're going to click next, and then it gives us these quotation marks. So if you recall, a quotation mark means a string. So I'm actually going to type score with a colon here, and that's going to put the word score with a colon on the screen, but I also want to include the variable. So I'm going to click the ampersand for and then I'm going to type score. And as you can see, as soon as I typed an S, it gave me some options, but I want it to be the value score. Oops. And I have to double click that. So our text is going to show the word score with a colon, because this is just human language. The computer doesn't know what this means, but it's also going to include the variable score. The computer does know what that means because that's an actual number and not text. Then I'm going to click done. So now we are going to do a quick test table. So what we're going to test is that the score increases by 1. Each time a cone is destroyed, the score is increased by 1. The score is visible at all times. The score stays in the top left corner at all times. Then the score increases up to 10. The score increases up to 10 with each cone. So we are going to, why don't you go ahead and test that, and then write in your actual outcome. And then if you have to take an action, meaning that it fails this test, why don't you type what the action is going to be? Okay, so hopefully you ran your test. I'm going to do mine now. I'm going to click preview. So now I have my car, I have the word score with a colon and the variable score. So the first thing I'm going to do is test to make sure that the score increases by 1. Okay, so every time I hit a cone, it increases by 1. The second test is that the score is visible at all times. As I drive around the screen, you will notice that the score is visible and that the score increases up to 10. Well, my score got to 9. I don't know what your score got up to, but I failed that last test. So my actual outcome, the cone is destroyed, the score increases by 1. The score is visible in the top left, correct. The score only goes, well, in my case, it was 9, not 4, but the action is the same. I need to add more cones. So that's probably what you needed to do too, unless you got really carried away with the cones. Who knows? Maybe you have to take away cones because maybe you put 15 cones on there. But Regardless, we're going to change the number of cones. We can do that. I'm going to close out this preview. I'm going to go back to my layout. So that what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab a cone and drop another cone right here. Ta-da! So I'm going to make this a little easier. I'm lining my cones up really nicely, but I'm going to show you something really quickly. So I have 10 cones here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But if I go to the preview, all right, you'll notice this cone is missing. What did I do wrong? Well, if I turn off the layer score, the cone disappears. I messed around and I accidentally put my cone on the wrong layer. So I'm going to right click that and I'm going to delete it. So I'm going to make sure I'm highlighting layer 0 and then I'm going to drag the cone here. So if I turn off layer score, the cone is still there. All right, so I'm going to go back to preview. All right, and I'm going to make sure that my score increases up to 10. Ta-da! All right, I'm done. So I want you to run that last test to make sure you've added your cone to the correct layer. And now for some feedback. What so far is good about the game, and what could we do next to improve our game? And so after you answer those questions, you're all set, and I hope to see you next week.